Welcome to Journey to Esquire, the podcast. I'm Jocelyn Hardrick, founder and president of Diversity Access Pipeline, Inc., the company behind this podcast and other great programs, like Journey to Esquire Scholarship and Leadership Program, which provides $2,000 cash scholarships to third-year law students and internships to second-year law students, along with leadership training and mentors. And Journey to Esquire, the blog, which provides insightful articles to help navigate you through law school and beyond. Find out more on our website, www.journeytoesquire.com. Hi, it's Jocelyn Hardrick, founder and executive director of Diversity Access Pipeline, Inc., the nonprofit behind this podcast and Journey to Esquire Scholarship and Leadership Program, and Journey to Esquire, the blog. I'm really excited today. We're passing the mic to Dee Jones, JD, PhD. And Dee is the daughter of Command Sergeant Major, retired, Levester Jones, Sr., and the late Liza Dudley Jones. She is a double gator. She graduated from University of Florida with her Bachelor of Arts in Political Science with a minor in education and with her JD. And she was in the Council for Legal Education Opportunity as a fellow, and so was I. So that's great. We can talk about that experience a little bit. And she's been practicing for 28 years doing both civil and criminal law. What's really interesting is she was a lawyer. She was doing civil law with insurance defense. And then she decided, hey, I'm going to get my PhD in higher education leadership in 2013. And then she worked for University of South Florida College of Medicine as an assistant professor, co-director of the Law and Medicine Scholarly Concentration, and co-director of the coaching program. And then she decided she, missed the law, came back, became a prosecutor for 4 years. So she has civil and criminal experience. And now she is back in the civil arena, working for Allstate Insurance Company, and serves as a quasi-judicial role as a hearing officer for Hillsborough County. And in her spare time, which I don't know where she has it, but she finds it somewhere. She enjoyed spending time with her daughters, who are both in law school. Welcome, Dee.
Thank you, Jocelyn, for having me. I appreciate you having me here.
Yeah, thank you for accepting our invitations. We know each other through the George Edgecombe Bar Association. I'm a longtime member. I love JIBA. And so we met at some meeting. We've seen each other a few times. And I said, you got to be on the podcast because I'd love to hear more about your story. So now that we know all the great things you're doing now, let's go back in time. What made you want to be a lawyer in the first place?
So, as you mentioned, my dad is a career military person, and he raised us to understand and appreciate all facets of humanity. So I was born in Bangkok. I lived in Michigan. I lived in Germany, and during the course of that time, I began to understand and appreciate, again, all facets of humanity and how people and systems evolve and the laws and the rules that really impact nations. And I just became very fascinated by that. And when I went off to college, I had to take several courses, and I actually thought about being a journalist. And one of the courses that I had to take for journalism as a prerequisite was policy and government. So it kind of whet my tongue, my appetite a little bit again for policy and systems. And as I took that class that summer, I sat there and I thought, this is exactly what I want to do. I want to create and be a part of creating systems and policies that impact people on a daily basis and shape the way that people live. And so I talked to my sister about it, and she said, well, the best way to do that is to be a lawyer, because lawyers create laws and they kind of, influence the way we live on a daily basis through regulations and ordinances. And that's kind of what spurred my interest. And after that, I was kind of on that pathway and graduated and decided I was going to pursue a career in law.
Yeah, that's interesting. I just started teaching a new class called Legislation and Regulation. It's called LegReg and Statutory Interpretation, which is a trend now in law schools. And it's interesting. Usually traditional law school, they don't even tell you about that stuff in your first year. So now I'm teaching the students, look at all these ways can influence policy and even down to city ordinances, right? All these things affect your life. But most people, when they think of law, they're thinking of big picture stuff that most lawyers don't even get to do, like trial work. So that's interesting that that's what first interested you. And we've had a lot of people who were interested in journalism and switched to law. So that seems to be a trend as well. So what was it like applying to law school? I guess you got to stay in the same place because you went to UF for both, but what was the process like?
So for me, the process, I won't say it was easy, but we had a really good dean at the University of Florida. His name was Raheem Reed. He actually ended up going out to University of California, Berkeley. That's how good he was. They stole him, not stole him, but recruited him from the University of Florida. And he had a heavy presence main campus, and we started this group called Minority Pre-Professional Association. And he was very strategic and very intentional about creating that pipeline. So he would come over to the main campus and work with our group to ensure that those of us that were interested in applying to law school knew the nuances, the unwritten rules, right? Making sure that we were involved in certain organizations, making sure that we were already talking to our professors and lining up our letters of recommendation, making sure that our grades were where they needed to be, making sure that we were involved not just in organizations that looked good on paper, but that kind of made us shine as leaders and helped the law school committee recognize that we were serious about shaping law and policy. And so he was very strategic about that because having been, I think, during that generation that didn't have that pathway and have mentors like that, he was intentional about creating that pipeline. So he kind of laid out the path for us and the plan for us. All we had to do was work the plan. And so we kind of took charge and we said we were going to do it. And there was probably maybe like 5 or 6 of us that decided, yeah, this is what we're going to do. And we just put our feet to the plow, our hands to the plow, and went for it. So the process was there and the support was there, but we still had to work the plan. And I started probably about a year out, making sure that I had my letters of rec in order, making sure that everything, my testing, studying for the LSAT, taking those courses, that was that. Now that probably was the most difficult part for me because I won't say I'm a not so great test taker, but standardized tests are different, right, for us in our culture sometimes. So I did a lot of prep work in that area and then just making sure that I was prepared as prepared as I could be for the process. And then I submitted all my materials. Interestingly, I applied for the fall and I did not get in for the fall at University of Florida. But Dean Reed once again was looking out for me. He says, "Don't worry about it because I want you to go ahead and reapply for the spring, and you're going to apply for the Council on Legal Education Fellow program." And he said, "And if you do that, you can still get into the spring and you'll also get a fellowship." And so he was strategic once again about helping me apply for the spring class and then also not guaranteeing, but putting his weight behind helping me get that fellowship. So in the end, it worked out for me. I started, 5 months later. Some people started in the fall. I started in January, but then I had money to go to school as well.
Oh, that's excellent. Yeah, Clio is absolutely awesome. They've recently celebrated 50 years of helping students learn about, prepare for, and get into law school. And for some people, like you said, they can give you a scholarship. I did their like 6 week boot camp kind of thing before law school, which helped out a lot because I
Mm.
came into law school hitting that ground running, knowing exactly what to expect. And the other students were like, "How do you know what's going on?" And I was very transparent. Some people in the program tried to hide it so that they can look extra slick, and I'm like, I did a boot camp. So if you
Yes.
want to know what I did, I'm happy to share it with you. But yeah, they help you hit the ground running. And it helps so much when you have a pipeline. It really does. Which is why we have Journey to Esquire, right? Our pipeline works with you once you're graduating from law school and getting into your first job and leadership positions. And our hope is to go backwards to really help develop the pipeline going all the way back to elementary school. But one baby step at a time.
Yes.
So is UF the only school you applied to then?
I applied to UF, I applied to FSU, and maybe one other school, but I
Okay.
had my heart really set on UF. Being a Gator in undergrad, I enjoyed my experience in undergrad. I knew the lay of the land. And again, once again, Dean Reed, he was there. And I knew that if anything, I had a staunch supporter in my corner. And I was happy to stay there as well. So, yeah, I think I only applied to 3 schools.
Yeah, it helps so much when you know there's someone advocating for you. I try to be that person at my law school, and the students tell me, like, you can't go anywhere, Professor Hardrick. You got to stay here and help us. And I'm like, I get it, I get it. But then, things happen. But University of Florida has been the top ranked law school in Florida for several years, and it's a public school, right?
Yes,
We were just
yes,
talking about your daughters both going to private big city schools, which is outstanding. They're great schools, but right, they get expensive. So
yeah.
if getting into UF is a really big deal here. And I know the people who went there have gotten a great education. And so now let's talk about your in-law school. How was your experience? Because you mentioned that the dean had actually left and was recruited away to another law school. So what was it like when you were finally there as a law student? And then kind of what activities did you participate in?
So I was there as a law student, and we had two sections, 100 students in each section. And as it is now, probably at some law schools, less than 10% of the class was diverse. So those of us that were in the minority hung together, hung out, studied together. I was not a non-traditional student from age perspective, but I was in the sense that I was engaged. And so my fiance at the time was traveling back and forth between Tampa and Gainesville. So I wasn't doing some of the things that some of the other students were doing, studying, but yet on the weekends still hanging out and had that undergrad mindset. I was very intentional and serious about my work and my school and my grades. So I kind of gravitated to some of the older students in the class, and I found a couple students that really were more intentional and focused on their studies. And so that made me really appreciate the law school experience because they had been out in the world and worked. And so they were like, look, I got a family to feed. So this is no joke for me, right? And I watched them and how they approach law school. And so I kind of took on that same mentality and mindset as well. But I did enjoy it from the standpoint of just the learning process. And of course, law school is different, right? It's not the undergrad sit there, take notes. You're back then it was Socratic method as it is now in some cases. You had to be prepared, you had to know your cases, you had to study. I understand now, like at least the professor gives you a heads up, they might call on you. Back then, you had no idea when they were going to call on you, so you had to be prepared every day. But I also got involved in BALSA, Black Law Student Association. I believe I was either like the secretary or vice president at some point in that organization. And I also got involved in the Law College Council because the Law College Council was the organization that was the liaison to student government on main campus that ensured the law school got funding. Because as you know, the law school sometimes being that auxiliary organization, the main campus forgets about it, right? Like the med school and the vet school. And so we wanted to make sure, no, we need funding just like every other organization on main campus, and especially when it comes to funding BALSA and some of those Caribbean associations and some of those other orgs at the law school. And so one of my mentors said, why don't you be the law school rep for Law College Council? Because that way you can guarantee that student government doesn't forget about the law school, and then also you're over the budget for the law school. So I was very strategic about making sure that we had the budget and the funding to do some of the activities that we wanted to do at the law school as well. And I believe I was also a mentor for some of the younger students when they came in as well, the 1Ls and the 2Ls by the time I got to my third year.
Yeah, that's a great experience. And another similarity we have, I was engaged in law school too, and I was at FSU. My husband was coming from Tampa Bay. So every
Yeah.
other weekend we'd alternate, and I was the same way. Like, I'm not here to hang out. I gotta do my work during the weekday. We had our call set at 9 p.m. every night. This was before when cell phones, it was cheaper after 9. So
Yes.
we'd call each other at 9 and have our little conversation every night and say goodnight. And then we'd alternate, who would go see who every other weekend, which means I didn't have all this time to be going to every happy hour and hanging out and all this stuff. And by Sunday, I was back Sunday night, back to studying, getting on the grind, getting ready.
Yeah.
So yeah, so it's good to know that lots of people can be successful in law school, but you may have to do it differently than your peers. So you always have to keep that in mind. So now you're, looking at graduating, you've done all the things. And what is it like looking for your first job?
Looking for my first job was very intimidating for me because in law school you hear a lot of different things. You hear, okay, wow, if you go to a big firm, they're gonna work you. You're gonna work 90 hours a week. You're not gonna have a life. In fact, I had my civil procedure professor told us this story one time. She said the reason I became a professor is because on Labor Day weekend I had worked all weekend, and I looked up and I realized all my friends were out enjoying their family, and I was in this big warehouse sorting through document production, and I realized I didn't want to do that. And so that kind of like deterred me from wanting to do big law. And then you kind of have in your mind, well, maybe I want to do in-house, but in order to get to an in-house position, you may have to do big law to get there, right? Then you hear the stories about the state, and you hear, okay, yeah, it's a good trial experience if you want to be a trial attorney, but again, that's, working an exorbitant amount of hours. So you kind of like, well, where do I fit in? Where am I going to get this experience in an area that I enjoy, but also make sure that I have work-life balance? So I was kind of not really sure. And fortunately, I can't even remember where Don Odom and I met, but I met Don Odom. And he said, why don't you come and just clerk for me at the county attorney's office and see if you like it? Now, he at that time was over like the land use department. I didn't like the area of law that he was, presided over his division, but I enjoyed learning from him, and I enjoyed uh, the work-life balance that I saw with those type of attorneys at the county attorney's office. And I thought, wow, this is maybe something that I would like to do. And so I worked for him for about 6 or 7 months while I was waiting to pass the bar. And eventually, unfortunately, he didn't have an attorney position open in his division. And at that point, I said, well, Don, I gotta, go get a job. And he said, no, I understand it. I understand. And he said, well, you should still try to do something in-house then. And I said, okay, what else can I do that's in-house that will allow me the flexibility that I want to have a family, but also still, provide a source of income? And he said, why don't you look at insurance defense? Why don't you look at maybe, being an insurance in-house with a major corporation? That's how I landed my first job. I was talking to a paralegal at my church. She was working in-house for a major insurance company, and she goes, we're hiring some attorneys, why don't you come down and interview? And that's how I got my first job.
Oh, wow. Yeah. And we love Don Odom. So I'll link his podcast interview in your show notes because he is a part of our oral history project,
Oh,
where
wow.
we go through, it's an oral history of pioneering attorneys, African American attorneys in the Tampa Bay area. So we'll make sure to link that because he has some great stories. And he was with the Hillsborough County's attorney's office for a long time.
Yes.
Um, and mentored a lot of people. So he's been great. And as a past president of the Black Law Students, the George Edgecombe Bar Association, and another leader and mentor for so many folks we've interviewed. So that's good to hear. So connections matter,
Yes,
right?
they do. They do. And,
Yes.
getting involved in associations, you can't be, as a new professional, sometimes you're hesitant and you're kind of nervous. But one of the best things you could do is get involved, like you said, in associations. Go to those membership lunches. When you get there, walk around, introduce yourself. Hey, hi, my name is Dionne or Dee, whatever. I'm a new law student, or I'm a new professional in the Tampa Bay area. I would love to have lunch with you. I heard that you are, a pillar in the community. I would love to glean from your wisdom. I would love if you would mentor me. People are willing to help you if they know what you need and they know how they can help you. So you can't be shy. I tell my daughters this all the time. You can't be, and I know that some people are introverts and so it doesn't come as natural, but you kind of have to put yourself out there in a way that people will understand what the need is and how they can help, because people want to help when they know what the need is. And so joining those associations and letting people know how they can support you is critically important, because you never know who knows someone that knows someone that knows someone, and making those connections will eventually open that door for you.
Yeah, and then I was gonna ask you what advice you have. That sounds like great advice, right? And a mentor of mine at my firm told me, listen, you need to join JIBA because you're just burying your head in the sand right now doing all this work and you're gonna end up miserable. You need to connect with other lawyers who are like-minded, who have similar backgrounds. And she was right. It just opened up a whole new door and made it so much more enjoyable to me because you've done litigation. You go to court all the time. People are yelling at you. Everyone's mad at you. Everything's adversarial. And I'm like, I didn't even do anything wrong. And then you go to like an association meeting. It's all love. It's everybody just happy to see one another and take a break and fellowship and break bread together and all that good stuff. So, what other associations are you involved in Tampa?
So in Tampa, I am well, as you mentioned, JIBA, George Edgecombe Bar Association. I'm actually the vice president of JIBA. In the community, I am the president of the board of trustees for 8 Brown Ministries. For those that don't know what 8 Brown Ministries or what the mission is, it's helping restore the rights, not necessarily the rights, I should say helping returning citizens kind of reintegrate back into society. And so our mission is to help them become productive citizens through the compassionate faith and hope and love of their Lord and Savior, and whatever that is for them, their religion, their faith. In addition, I am a 32-year member of Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated, where I am the leadership development chair there as well. I'm also involved in the Kiwanis International Society, where I serve on the scholarship committee. And then I also am kind of like the liaison between the undergraduate committee that they have. It's called CKI. So we support the younger, I guess you would say, youth committee on the University of South Florida's campus, which is like the baby Kiwanis Club at the University of South Florida. So those are three or four of the organizations that I'm primarily active in. I've been involved in the National Black Prosecutors Association as well. So the vice president of that for a couple years. In my past experience, I was a co-chair of diversity committee for Hillsborough Association of Women Lawyers. I've also served and volunteered a lot with Bay Area Legal Services, their diversity committee, their pro bono committee. They have an iLawyer program where they help the indigent with legal services after hours. I've done that for many years. Also, their domestic violence clinic. So I have a long thread of serving the community. I really enjoy community service and helping people have access to justice.
Yeah, and you're checking a lot of the same boxes I check. So I'm like, how did we not run into each other more? But
I
it's
don't
probably
know.
different time periods because I used to
Yes.
do Bay Area, their forms clinic,
Hmm.
and I'm very passionate about returning citizens and rights restoration. So I've worked with a group to help with that. And you're talking about the other stuff, the wraparound services, right? Because there's so many services that folks need when they're returning. And they
Hmm.
need, our society isn't really set up for them to become productive and stay away from the behavior and the environments that led them there in the first place. So, really speaks to my heart. So, that's great. So, of course, we're a diversity, equity, inclusion program and podcast. We always want to touch on that. What's on your mind about diversity right now, particularly in Florida legal community?
So in the legal community, one of the things, just Jocelyn, that I'm thinking about and is heavy on my heart is the bench. My next step in my legal career is to run for judicial office, and I will be a candidate for judicial office next year. So I'll be on the ballot in 2024 as a judicial candidate. And part of the reason that I am pursuing judicial office is because I believe in diversity on the bench.
We've had a lot of students who say they want to be a judge, but they almost whisper it, right? Because they don't even know, they just know it's a big deal, but they don't know the steps. And I'm like, you can take baby steps. Can you walk us through some of those baby steps of how to become a judge?
Sure. So in Florida, you have two pathways that you can choose to become a judge. The first is the appointment process. And I did apply to be on the bench. You have an application that you complete. There is a judicial nominating commission that reviews your application. And then there's an interview process that you go through. And then of all the applicants that submit, they send up 6 names to the governor to consider. And then the governor chooses the person that he wants to appoint. The first time that I applied, I don't believe I received an interview. It was a very competitive class that time. I want to say there were probably over 20 people that applied. The second time that I applied, I did receive an interview. My name did not advance to the governor for the selection process. Simultaneously, though, I have been preparing to also run. The second way that you can become a judge is to, get your name on the ballot and actually run a campaign and run for election. It takes about a good 3 to 4 years to actually prepare to run for a judicial seat. And I say that for several reasons. One, because you want the community who is voting on you to know you, right? When they go to that ballot and they look at your name, they want to associate your name with, wow, she's involved in this in the community, she does this, we know her from this perspective. You don't want it the first time they see your name to say, well, who is this Dee Jones? Why is she? I don't know who she is, right? You want them to understand and be able to connect you with your community involvement, and not just because you're doing it to be on the ballot, but because you really have a heart for serving and being a public servant, because that's what a judge is. A judge is a public servant. It's a privilege and it's an honor to sit on that bench, and again, to understand the issues that come before you, because you're the one that is administering justice on behalf of these complex problems that come before you. In addition to that, you want people to understand and appreciate who you are as a qualifying jurist. So, she's tried cases, she's, been in jury trials, and she's arbitrated, or she's been a mediator, those type of things as well. That takes time. If you've not been preparing your profile in a way that elevates you to that status, it takes time to do those things. You can't just one day wake up and decide I'm gonna, run for judge. So it takes about a good 2 to 3 years to do that. And I would even recommend sometimes even working on someone's campaign before, so that you can see how to person runs the campaign, and because there's another aspect to it from a business standpoint as well. And so that's another way that you can become a judge. So through the appointment process is one, or two, again, to run a full-fledged campaign and be on the ballot.
Yeah, and I would say they're both really campaigns, aren't they?
Yes, yes, they
Because the
are.
members, instead of the public who's electing you for the appointment process, it's the members of the JNC and the governor's office, right? There's a lot of peoples who are influencing that process. So it's really important that you're leveraging your connections and network to campaign on your behalf to those members of the JNC. And again, this sounds overwhelming, but baby steps, right? There's consultants who can help with this.
Mhm.
You have years of building up your resume, your experience, but also raising the money, because this can get expensive depending on how big your jurisdiction is. And getting all your ducks in a row in the application, because there's a lot of information. But if you know you want to be a judge, I'm talking to our listeners, there's just nowhere to start. The first place to start is make sure you're getting into positions that are giving you litigation experience, because all judges are doing some form of litigation. And then make sure you're keeping track of all the stuff you do, because the application is going to ask you about all of that. So just have a running like Google Doc of everything I do, every award I get, every presentation, every paper I have a link or saved. That's a great place to start. And we want to thank Dee Jones for joining us today. This was such a great conversation. It was very informative too.
Thank you so much for having me. I really do appreciate the time to just share, my story, and share the things that have been instrumental in getting me where I am. I'm grateful for every experience, whether it was positive or, helped me to take a pivot and turn and do something different. I think all of it really helps you to learn and to grow and to expand yourself and your knowledge base. And if I could just leave the listeners, and especially those students that are up and coming through the pipeline, those that either want to go to law school or that are aspiring to, start their first job, is just take advantage of every opportunity. Give yourself grace. Be appreciative of every opportunity, grateful for every opportunity, but take advantage of every opportunity. I was thinking this morning when I was becoming a lawyer, the only African American or even lawyer that I knew was Justice Quince. Justice Quince and I went to church together. We were both members at New Hope Missionary Baptist Church. But by the time I got in law school, she was on the Second District Court of Appeals. So she was accessible, but she wasn't, in my near close sphere of influence. And so some of the things I had to create pathways for myself. But now this generation that's coming through, we are, we're almost everywhere. And so there's no reason why a lawyer or law student should have to struggle to create and to be in the space that they want to be in. You just have to make yourself known, make your desires known, and take advantage of the people that you know, the network that you have, and again, be ready, be prepared. Have the opportunity. When you have the opportunity, make sure that you're ready for the opportunity, but take advantage of the opportunity as well.
Yeah, that's great advice. And Justice Quince is in our oral history, so we'll link her story in the show notes as well, because she just joined us this year and kind of helped us revamp that oral history project. Okay, well, we'll see you guys next time. Thank you for joining us on Journey to Esquire, the podcast. Thanks for tuning in to another great episode of Journey to Esquire, the podcast. Support, share, subscribe. And for more, visit www.journeytoesquire.com.